So, welcome to Kenmo Street Radio. In this episode, I would like to discuss the idea of collective artificial intelligence. And, it's really remarkable what progresses the artificial intelligence systems are making. But at the same time, it's striking that they usually occur in singular form. For example, GPT-4 is singular, although you can fine-tune it with prompt engineering. Once you finish a particular session, that context setting will be lost. And that makes sense because you don't want to be affected by prompt engineering by other people. So when you encounter GPT-4, no matter how many times you might do it, you would want to have a fresh start. You wouldn't want a localized version where GPT-4 has been influenced by the millions of people that it has interacted with, and therefore affected in its performance, and it's not really a great idea. So we seem to think. So the assumption is that GPT-4 is always exist in a singular form, and each time we start to interact with it with prompts, we would like to have a fresh start. So it's a kind of a clean state beginning, really, for GPT-4. And then we would try to work on it through our prompts. And of course, the prompt size is really large now, so that we can put a lot of context onto it, so that we would extract information that are relevant to us. And that is fine, but always there will be this assumption that GPT-4 is in a singular form. There is one GPT-4 and not multiple versions of it. If there were multiple versions of GPT-4, then it will be difficult to assess its performance. So when people review GPT-4, the assumption is that it's just one entity, and that is the assumption. Otherwise, people wouldn't be able to agree on what particular instance of GPT-4 they are interacting with, and that would be really confusing. So it is great that there is one singular form of GPT-4 from the point of view of reviewing and quality control and so on. On the other hand, when it comes to humans, of course, there are many different persons. And for example, when you say, or well, I have spoke to an American, there might be some genetic properties of American person, but at the same time there will be individual differences. So the assumption is that even if we have had a certain kind of experience with a particular individual from America, it doesn't necessarily mean that that would be representative of all the American people. Indeed, the assumption would be that it would be just one instance of an individual, and so there will be really different aspects of personalities distributed within the population, so that it's really difficult to overgeneralize. It's not a really great idea to overgeneralize your conclusion about the assessed qualities of an individual. So, when it comes to artificial intelligence systems, there seems to be this assumption of monoculture, which is understandable because, that's the way technology works. And although it's quite interesting to say that, when you search for something on the search engine like Google, you, of course, expect different outcomes depending on the search entry. So although there is one Google search engine at one time, the result, it was of course different. And we accept the fact that depending on past search histories and cookies, for example, the search result might be different from people to people, although there would be some generic tendencies. There would be individual differences in the search results, and we accept that. So so even if there's just one search engine, one entity, singular form, we accept the fact that the outcome might be different. So it's quite interesting how we sort these identity problems out. Is there one GPT, or are there many GPTs? And for the moment, the way those large language models are, organize and function, that they do not depend so critically upon personality traits. One reason being that there aren't great many data on the interaction between each of us and the LLM, so that even if the large language models would like to fine-tune the results depending on personal traits, there are not so many data to do that on, and partly because at this moment we are still interested in the generic properties of large language models, and we might want to compare ChatGPT with Bard, Google's counterpart, to in the large language models. We might want to compare that, but the assumption then would be also that there's one Bard and one GPT-4, and we would compare the performance of these things, and so, but we would start from the assumption of single entity. So it's like it's like if you compare that situation with nationalities, it's like there's just one American, be it Joe Biden or Donald Trump, and there's just one Japanese, Naomi Osaka or Ken Mogi, myself, and the assumption is that you would compare an American response and a Japanese response with the assumption that there's just one single entity. But of course, it's not realistic or politically correct in the case of humans. And so the question is, why should it be like this for artificial intelligence systems? Of course, it's still in the initial period of their development. So this can be understood in terms of practical conventions. But in the future, as a matter of principle, would it be sensible to make a society of artificial intelligence systems so that these would be distributed in terms of functionalities and personalities? If AIs indeed do have personalities, and there would be a society of artificial intelligence systems, and would our experience then be different from time to time depending on which particular instance of artificial intelligence, large language models we interact with? That's one question, and that's quite interesting because the assumption is that so far depending on the prompt that we enter, of course the outcome would be different, but when we talk about the society of artificial intelligence systems, even if we give the artificial intelligence systems exactly the same prompt, depending on the personality, the response would be different. And that is actually the case with humans, with real humans. We, of course, are not so surprised when responses from persons are different, even if we give them the same prompt. And that is actually quite natural with humans. But with artificial intelligence systems, or indeed any engineering systems, we start from the assumption that the machine would behave in exactly the same way. And so the variability would be entirely due to inputs. And of course, we can talk about tailor-making, and personalizing all these artificial intelligence systems, and that would also require consideration of privacy issues and maybe collective coherence. For example, there might be a service in which particular gender, age, or ethnicity group might be grouped together, and depending on the collective response or collective prompt activities of this particular group of individuals, the artificial intelligence systems might be made to function differently, and that is certainly a possibility. And that would, of course, raise important ethical issues. Do you want to, for example, if you are a young English person, would you be happy with the idea that when you enter a prompt onto large language models, you are treated as a cohort, as one individual in the young British adult sector? And depending on your household income, your education, your preferences, and so on, you might actually be given different responses from large language models. And even if that would give you a result more fine-tuned to your personal preferences, would you be happy with that? I doubt it. I don't think people are yet ready to accept that kind of tailor-made responses from the large language model. So I think the fact that the large language models start from a clean slate, except that they are based on the statistical ensemble of a large body of corpus of inputs on the web. Apart from that, I think people expect large language models just rather like to be a newborn baby with no assumption about what person you are and so on. And I think we are happy with that notion. So, there are some very interesting assumptions involved here about what the large language models should be. We treat them as if they are kind of a dictionary or, kind of a know-it-all Wikipedia 2.0. And that's our assumption. But that comes with the price of being bland and, colorless and devoid of individualistic characters that would make conversation interesting. The large language models have been around just for a few months, for a few weeks, and each time they are updated, of course our perception of them renewed. But we are still in the early stage of adaptation to these technologies, and we are still amazed. We are still, intrigued. But once these novelty values go away, then we would be starting pretty serious questions. And one of them might be actually the lack of individuality, lack of uniqueness in large language models. And that is not highly valued in the market. The adjective bland is a killer. If you say that something is bland, then it is worthless. And in the art world of literature, music, arts, and so on, people always seek individualistic expressions. So if large language models like GPT-4 is perceived to be colorless, personality-less, just bland machines, then their perceived market value would plummet. Except, of course, for use as kind of default, tasteless, not so impressive manifestations of the collective intelligence or ignorance of the humans. So I think this argument or discussions about the individualistic variability of artificial intelligence is very important. And let's, for a sake of argument, imagine a world where there are a variety of individual, a variety of artificial intelligence systems, and just like we are so diverse in our abilities and personalities and value systems and so on as human beings. Let's suppose that we had equivalently diverse variability in the field of artificial intelligence. What would happen then? It's quite interesting for one thing, how would that variability be actualized? Because, as it stands, we have a certain set of evaluation functions, and when you develop artificial intelligence system, it takes a lot of money. It requires a lot of natural resources and human resources and, electricity, storage space, and so on. So it's a high-stake business. So naturally, you would like to, make the system as high functioning as possible. So it doesn't make sense to, deviate the system away from optimization. And of course, there could be arguments about what functionalities to be optimized. But once there is an agreement that certain set of evaluation functions would be required for artificial intelligence system, then engineers involved would naturally want to, make the system optimal. So variability wouldn't come from that arena. So if variability comes, it should come from a failure to optimize. And a failure to optimize is ubiquitous in human society. Each of us are very far from the optimum state, and that's because our life is limited in time and capacity and memory and so on. And each of us pursue different life goals. Like some of us would like to be painters, musicians, scientists, doctors, business personnel, mothers, fathers, and so on. And so dancers, policemen, politicians. So for each of these professions, there are different requirements on the functionality of the brain. And so that, given the fact that we are given only a limited capacity in terms of memory and so on in our brain, and also the fact that the time we spend as living entities on this earth is rather limited, we develop different personality traits, and so each of us are optimized in different ways within each respective context. So we have this structure, and there are billions of people on this earth, and there's this scope for, variability for living humans, but not so much for artificial intelligence systems. Of course, there are many different companies and corporations and universities, research institutes working on artificial intelligence. So they would have different strategies, different ideas about the development of AIs. So that would lead to some variabilities in the system. But on the other hand, these models increasingly require a huge investment of resources. And it's a high-stake business, so people don't want to mess it up. And that means that there would be less scope for variability. You don't want to be making or perceived to be making a foolish artificial intelligence system. A human being can be a fool. I mean, if you choose to be a fool, you can do that. Because in some ways there's enough ecological niche for that. But for artificial intelligence systems, because the stakes are so high, there are not so many niche for foolishness. Wow, reminds me of the days when the cryptocurrencies were, kind of springing up like bamboo shoots, and not so anymore, but thousands or tens of thousands of different cryptocurrencies were competing for attention grabbing. But now these days are past, I think. But even compared to cryptocurrencies, the variability of large language models would be less diminished, because there are many major players in the market, and these people are really clever, and the threshold to cross in order to build a large language model is high. Well, in the future, it might become lower. Then we might actually start to see different large language models competing in the market, but not for the moment. So there's a monopoly of market, and that doesn't mean that it's great. It's going to be great for in terms of variabilities in the large language model system. So, but so that is the status quo. But suppose we just for the sake of it, suppose there are different large language models, variabilities of large language models, or even better still, we might actually start to develop different functionalities for different artificial intelligence systems. Now we are talking about this prompt engineering, right? And this idea that given a prompt, the artificial intelligence systems would make some responses. Within that context, maybe there would be few very limited variability in the foreseeable future. But suppose there were many different functionalities. For example, the functionality of allocating computational resources within the society, or the functionality of matching people, or functionality of trajectory making or itinerary making, like in the traveling salesman problem. There are many different computations that are useful for humans, and for each of it there might be different components of artificial intelligence systems, and there might be different optimization strategies. So rather than working for just one artificial general intelligence AGI, like in the case of Gato, or indeed in the case of GPT-4, some people are claiming, like in this paper put on archive a few days ago, there might be some people who are saying that maybe GPT-4 would function as AGI. It has a potential for that, certainly, given the fact that it is a multimodal system. It is quite possible. But when it comes to more general functionalities required in society, maybe it's a great idea not to have just one artificial intelligence system, but to have a spectrum of different AI systems on the board, and let them function together. And then we might actually have a true society of AIs. There's this emergency vehicle going on. Maybe it's telling the world that these AI systems are rampant now rampant in the world, and I don't know. I'm just hallucinating, like large language models. So, even if I'm just saying that even if there is going to be a monopoly on in the artificial intelligence systems, there might be different functionality domains, plugins, and different makeups of the whole system, and that might actually be the source of variability of artificial intelligence systems, and then we might start to see collaborations between these artificial intelligence systems, and that might actually be closer to what we call society of artificial intelligence systems. It's quite conceivable that in the near future there would be different systems proposed for different aspects of functionalities in society, and for each of that, different versions of AI would be optimum, so that some of them might be actually rather like B2B domain. I mean, they wouldn't probably interact with humans directly. There would be behind the back, kind of a back-end processing rather than front-end processing, and studying these things might not be so glamorous as studying large language models, but these artificial intelligence systems might actually be required from some point of view, and that actually might be a move towards real society of artificial intelligence systems. And when it comes to that, it's when we go back to how human societies are organized, it's quite interesting why we are like this. If you look at human society, there's this division of labor, and not one single individual is a Renaissance man. This concept of Renaissance man is an illusion. Nobody is almighty, and nobody is genius. I mean, if you look at Leonardo da Vinci, he was not a Renaissance man in that idealized version of almighty man. He was a good painter. But apart from that, his research was amateurish. His drawings about helicopters and so on just amateurish. I mean, it's not really great. So this illusion of somebody who can do all of these things is an illusion. We are not made like that. So a mathematician would be terrible in painting. A painter would be really bad in programming, and a musician would be a really bad prose writer, and a novelist would be bad in painting. And so this is actually the reality of the human brain. So we are organized in such a way that many different people collaborate. For example, if you want to build a car, there would be many different components of work, designing and manufacturing, painting, blah blah blah, and these would be the fundamental aspect of human society for many years to come. And that's the way we humans are organized. And why is that? I mean, probably because we are in a situation where we are constrained by the natural limits of being alive. I mean, each of us has only a limited capacity of brain, and memory space is limited, so that we need to kind of fine-tune in each of us brains in a way that would be good for a particular purpose. That is sometimes called a job, or occupation or calling, depending on the way you look at it. And so we are, each of us optimized for something different because of our limited capacity. So maybe in order to bring about a society of artificial intelligence, maybe we should do that in AI systems too, to limit their capacity and make them to occupy a certain ecological system. But computationally speaking, it is debatable whether this would be anything superior to the way AI systems are developed right now, with virtually unlimited memory space and no particular requirement on the job description and so on. Well, I'm now coming to close to railway station, so probably I will stop recording pretty soon because there are people. So it's probably time for me to summarize. Artificial intelligence systems are progressing in very different ways from the human brain, and one of the reasons might be due to the fact that they are virtually unlimited in memory capacity and so on. So that means that there would be less variability in the functionality compared to the human brains. And in the human society, there are a society of minds, and that has enriched human culture and civilization for centuries, but that probably doesn't happen for artificial intelligence systems. So it'll be great to make comparisons between the different ways human brains and artificial intelligence systems have evolved. And it'll be great to consider conditions for the development of the society of artificial intelligence systems, because that would presumably make AIs more robust and more human-friendly. And so this is, I think, is a very important conversation piece for the foreseeable future. So with the thought, I close this episode of Kenmogi's Street Brain Radio. Thank you for listening.